Hello and welcome to another preview. It's been a while since we've done these, and so we've decided to really take on a Goliath of a task, and we're going to be previewing every single BLAST major RMR event in one sitting. Joining me, as he always does, is Yumi, and, well, Yumi, you are just about to fly out to actually cast the Asian RMR. How you doing? You excited?
Yeah, no, it's kind of hard to contain. It's weird that it's all happening kind of so quickly. Like I've known for some time ahead of the announcement and all that, but the end of this month came rather quick, and suddenly we're just going to be setting off to a part of the world that I'd never even thought I'd ever really visit. So it's kind of a crazy circumstance to be in. I'm the old. I mean, listen, everybody else, people looked at the announcements for the talent and they said, "Oh, there's so many UK commentators." And I'm the only one of those UK commentators that is somehow going to the Asia RMR. Like I got my roots in UKCS, but with the by virtue of the work that we've been doing over the past couple of years, just ended up becoming a Asia correspondent to a certain degree. So yeah, it's crazy the way the world works out in the end, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's super cool to see. As someone who does watch early morning Counter-Strike, I know you've been quite locked in and attached to the scene for a while. Firstly, before we get into the extensive discussion, we have to quickly recap the last event we previewed, which was I Am Katowice. Now, I don't often take L's. Any of you watched last season will know that it's mostly dubs up in here, but I took a pretty hefty L. Both of my favourites crashed out. None of our underdogs did anything, but then Yumi's favourites ended up being both finalists. So he took a resounding 3-0 lead in this second season, which I'm pretty horrified by, but at least, well, there's a whole load of points to make up in this one because, yeah, as you told me before we actually went live, this is something I hadn't actually totted up. We will be talking about 14 sides each. That's right, 2 favourites and 2 underdogs from all the RMRs except Asia, where it's 1 apiece. Only 8 teams in that RMR, no point doing 2. There's going to be a lot of points made, a lot of exchanges, and a lot of points up for grab. Yumi, we're going to start with BLAST RMRA. Who is your first favourite pick?
So my favorite, sorry, let me just check my notes. There's so many. VirtusPro. VirtusPro is my first favorite out of RMRA, and I feel like it's not something that's too different from any other sort of prediction that we've had of the outsiders previously in other tournaments. It's that these guys are pretty damn consistent. Like they may not play the Counter-Strike that a lot of people enjoy, but even with them adding in Chiron, he's ended up becoming a secondary sort of entry. It's weird because outsiders VirtusPro have always played a little bit more loose in terms of like a firmly committed role, like since the departure of Jakindar. Flit's taking a lot of opening duels. Chiron's also doing kind of the same. And I think the longer they have with him, the better it's going to become. And, I think while their results at Pro League weren't too great, able to get to the out of the playoffs in losing in that first round to NAVI. That wasn't a game where they were too impressive, but their Ancient was quite close. And I think if we're going to see this version of VirtusPro succeed, Ancient will end up becoming one of the staple maps that Chiron will have to be, kind of a leader on for the squad. I like Jame. I like the core of this squad. I just feel like they're right up there with, I'd say, Heroic as probably the most consistent teams in the tier 1. You know what you're going to get from them.
Yeah, all fair points. Especially, I really like that idea about Chiron because, yes, they are a little more fluid with the roles, and he does also have some entry duty, but in general, it's just their style is a little unique. It has a little bit of their own special sauce to it. So give him a little more time, and I'm sure he'll look even more comfortable. He'll find his own little ways of having impact because he's a very high skill player. And yeah, I think a solid enough pick. The way we draft these things, I'm just going to put this side note in here quick, does mean that we've ended up in a strange situation because we drafted all of these at once with just free reign to take our picks from any moment. So it's very tactical, which is why I've ended up with, well, probably on paper, the 2 biggest favourites of BLAST RMRA, which is leading me nicely into my first pick, which is, of course, Pro League winners, FaZe Clan, undoubtedly favourites in this group. Like, I know we always say these RMRs is a bit of chaos. You're playing lower level teams, best of ones, all these little things. I don't care. They're the best team. They should get out of this eventually. Sure, they've had moments in the past at majors where maybe they've disappointed even in the best of threes, but I don't expect that at this point. At this point, there's too many teams that are just so far below them that I expect them to cruise through this. They've found their form again, found their style, found their mojo, back with the Grand Slam, and I think cruising through this part. Yumi, anything to say against FaZe Clan right now?
I think the only thing I have against them is that while I agree they'll probably make it out of the RMR, I don't think that they are favorites for the major. You know, I kind of held this opinion when they won. It was Antwerp. When they won at Antwerp, I wasn't convinced that they were going to do much damage at Rio, just simply because I think they'd lost the sort of driving factor behind why they were trying to win. You know, the first major for all these guys, first international team to do it, first international team to now win the Grand Slam. So pressure is off. You know, there's no expectations as far as next goal and the accomplishment aside from, or next accomplishment to then succeed in. The only thing that they can really add to that is, hey, we won the last Counter-Strike Global Offensive major, and I just don't think there's going to be enough drive or enough like hunger for it, because this will be the last time for a lot of other teams that don't have majors that will probably have to work that much harder to try and get this last one, especially, you know, players like Nico who might not even end up with a major in Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Like those are legacy moments that they're hoping to succeed in, considering the amount of time they've invested in this particular version of the game.
Yeah, valid. I actually haven't. You do bring up a good point. As favorites of the major, bookies wise, like yeah, sure, maybe you'd probably have to have them there. But my mind keeps going elsewhere. I keep thinking Vitality's home major. I keep thinking G2 with a lot left to prove for these players. I keep thinking of NAVI. Like, is this, you know, where we see them back up to full strength with enough time to embed NPL? I keep calling him Nipple on streams. I'm sorry. It's not gonna like leave my mind for a while. He's still Nipple to me.
He didn't jump in quick enough to say it wasn't Nipple. So
yeah, like Navi maybe figuring it out. Like all these teams come to my mind first when I think of who I'd actually end up choosing to win the major. But yeah, FaZe on paper should be the #1 pick. All right, Yumi, second favorite. Here's where it gets a bit funny. Who have you taken?
My second favorite is Fnatic. Now, this is because of who you've ended up selecting as well, that I've ended up in this direction. But I've gone with another international team. I do have a soft spot, Mezzy, UK boy. But I like the core of this roster. My main concern for Fnatic, and I'll add this caveat in now before I start talking about like the good parts, is that Fasher still does feel like you're not getting the same level of Fasher as you were expecting when he joined this roster. It's just it's so hard to replicate the same kind of conditions in which he got these high level performances on previous rosters. And the system that Mezzy and I think it's Roy that's sort of secondary calling and sort of taking in, leadership roles within that team as well, isn't really conducive to allow Fasher that same level of space. That being said, I do think that the way in which Fnatic are calling some of their T-side rounds, albeit sometimes it is sometimes maybe too loose, I do think that they get a good feel for games quite quickly when they end up in sort of best of one circuits in particular. And when they know that those are the stakes, I will expect Roy to have a good game and Nico does alongside him, and you know, get a weird 3K 4K round from players like Mezzy or Crims or the sort. I feel like this core of riflers that they have, hell, even their AWPer, have built enough reputation around themselves as just being a safe pair of hands for a lot of them. And it may not have the highest ceiling, but getting out of the RMR should be really no problem.
Yeah, the roster often gets critiqued for being low, lacking firepower. I see that on desks. I feel like we're talking about different teams there, because for me, they do have firepower. They just don't have any structure or sense to like how they've been assembled, and that's the biggest problem. There's another thing that keeps bugging me now, as I've been watching them play online leading into this RMR, and they can lose to literally anyone. And now I know LAN adds extra pressure, adds a different dynamic, but every time we say that, we still have been watching for the last couple years, you know, post-COVID, every LAN we've returned to, Tier 2 teams who are impressive online are managing to put up pretty close to the same level when they actually do play on LAN. So I'd be a little worried if I was a Fnatic fan or Fnatic better, but they still should have, you know, in between all of those names, enough firepower to get through it.
Yeah, I'd say kind of similarly, Spirit are kind of in the same camp where, they have some good wins, they have some very close series, but then some of their online games, like they will and have lost to teams that they know they should beat, and they probably would beat if they're on LAN as well. So I I would kind of lump them into the same category. It was kind of hard to I can't even remember if Spirit are in RMRA to be honest, but it was hard
They are
to
in. Ooh, they're in B.
well, there you go. That's a little spoiler, I guess. I didn't pick them.
Yeah, well, Spirit are going to be another one we're probably going to touch on briefly, even if no one does pick them. I think they've deserved that level of reverence, I think, with some of their performances, especially at majors. But let's get into my second RMRA pick. The other favourite really left in that group, NAVI. I think this Pro League, even though, yeah, they lost in the semis, they made the semis. And they made it through every single step of the playoffs. So they had to win 4 playoff matches to make the final. They lost at the final hurdle. Lost to FaZe in 3 maps. FaZe would eventually go on to be champions. I'm really liking this sort of resurgent Navi. I think the keys to it has been redefining what maps they're actually good on and which maps they can actually play consistently. I think Ancient coming a lot more into their map pool, mostly because of Perfecto's ability to just go out and get you round wins, which is something you don't expect from other maps, but it's really important that if you're taking Electronic off the star roles, like you're not putting the same emphasis on his fragging, you need him to be able to step up. You need Perfecto to step up into that space, and then you need Bit to take more opening fights, both of which you see perfectly exemplified in the way they play Ancient, and then it's translated to success across a couple other maps. I think Mirage is still looking brilliant. So all in all, Navi look a lot stronger. They've really started to ramp up at the right time, I think, with this MPL variety. People are still talking about roster moves, and people forever will, unless they win this major. I think that's going to be the long and the short of it of Navi. Everyone's going to go, oh, bring an IGL in, or bring in a bigger fragger than this MPL kid. If they go on and win the major, everyone shuts up. But for now, I'm still happy with the level they're showing. I think there's places for them to go, but RMRA should be a breeze for them.
Yeah, and it's something that Navi have had to deal with for the longest of times. Even when Bit came into the roster, people were like, is this guy good enough? And then he suddenly got good enough with enough time, and suddenly he was the top rifler for a part of the year on that sort of Stockholm run. So yeah, I do see the vision. I am still a little hesitant about NPL, but again, it's another one of those situations where I think given more time, I felt like NPL was put under the microscope because it felt like people were sort of saying he's not supposed to be there, he's not ready, blah, blah, blah. And he would make a lot of mistakes because he would try to do too much sometimes. And, that's where players like Perfecto, if he's going to be winning rounds for you, can actually offer some guidance because Perfecto was really solid in terms of playing it, more defensively. Sometimes just dealing with side hits by playing off angles more and just trying to keep himself alive in moments that were actually very hard to sort of navigate out of. That's where I'm actually hoping that there is some kind of transition or hierarchy to the way that people are offering tutelage to NPL instead of it just all being reliant on Blade. Because some of the interviews on the ESL Pro League desk were kind of brutal. The way that he was talking about NPL. What's the biggest risk you've ever taken? Choosing you. I think those were his words. And I can imagine hearing that as a player just going, oh my god, I'm gonna get kicked. I'm gonna get kicked.
Yeah,
I like the Navi pick.
Yeah, some of the social dynamics have been questionable. But yeah, that's our favourites rounded out. Let's go into the underdogs. This is where things had to get perhaps a little interesting, because not everyone's going to be as familiar with some of these names. So RMRA, first underdog, who have you got?
So I've got one win. If you'd asked me a week ago, I probably wouldn't have put them here. But I've been able to catch a few of their games recently, either just the games that are on or being able to cast them myself. I think that we are going to see a bit of a resurgence from Boomich. That's where the roster moves took this this roster, and I didn't hate it, but I thought it was strange that they had 2 in-game leaders. Nickelback's in there, Boomich is in there, and I'll be honest, I was never really on the bandwagon of Boomich is a solid in-game leader. I always felt like
Mhm.
he was just an instrument for Blade, and I think that was reflected in some of the earlier results from Navi before the major win. But I think, so far from what I've seen, Boomich is actually being kind of fearless. The same way as an in-game leader for Navi, he would sometimes int a little bit, maybe
Yeah.
make a bit of a crazy play. He is still just as fearless in taking duels, but it feels like it's got more of a purpose now. And that coupled alongside players like Deco and Forrester, I find it hard to not think that they've got enough firepower to cause some upsets.
Okay. Well, I've also been watching them the last couple of weeks. I watched them once, really. I watched them play Falcons and watched Boomich absolutely shit the bed. So I have
Well,
zero
there you
belief
go.
in the Boomich aspect of that roster.
Mm,
Like I agree, there's some nice little talents on there. They've
yeah.
picked up Deco. They've got Forrester as well. I think Travis is a guy I've always liked. He's on this roster too, if I'm not mistaken.
hmm
So yeah, it's a solid enough looking roster. Specifically, the Boomich part is what I struggle with. But yeah, other than that, you're not the worst pick, I think, for an
He's
underdog.
just gonna have to he's gonna have to go through a transition in his career where he's going back to old QBF kind of
Mm.
Boomage, where he's actually a bit more of a fragging kind of star for this team. And yeah, maybe it's a far cry from what you want to see out of him so far, but I think he's working on it. He's working on it, and I think it'll be there in time for the RMR.
Okay. I've gone for what I consider a far more sure thing in my RMR 8 underdog pick. The first one I've got is Sprout, who, with prior rosters, have shown quite a good level at these kind of RMR events. This is a bit of a weird time for them because they've got a new IGL, finally replacing Refresh, which is something that anyone who watched them has been begging for because there's clearly a leadership problem in that team for a while. Post their last major success, I guess. Like, there was a lot of problems that kept flaring up.
hmm
And they're a team, they've been a bit up and down, a bit spotty, but I believe in the talent. Like, Zyphon, Stare, and Lonex is like tier 2 young kids. Like, you don't get much better than that in terms of a combo. Zello's been solidly plugging away for years. But then having Azza come in, I think really is a sign of them actually making the right moves and taking the right steps towards actually being a really legit team again. So I think underdogs here, they're going to have a couple maps they're going to go to and be solid. They're going to get star performances at times out of any of those three riflers. And they're going to cause some problems. Again, I'm not picking them here because they're a sure thing, hence the underdogs. But I think they're definitely one of the more dangerous teams who have got a low profile coming into this event.
Yeah, no, I think that's reasonable. Just because, listen, as Azur, lovely dude, and I feel like he was out of circulation in the scene for too long, actually, in terms of getting an in-game leader into rosters. I do have a problem with Sprout in terms of the direction they're going as an organization, because it did feel like they were just constantly hunting for a quick fix solution that wasn't going to come quite so easily. Outsiders bit the bullet, they made a roster move. Cloud9 bit the bullet, they made a roster move. Unless you're not expecting tier 2 teams to try and think in the short term, really, when you're
Mm.
trying to build a project, especially with young guys. It didn't make sense to me that they were trying to transition Refresh and toyed with Maze, but it didn't work out. I think that he did an interview with Scriv where it was talked about that they wanted to play a little bit more loose, and were kind of concerned about the sort of more immediate results and how quickly it would be to integrate a system that works simply. And Maze's one or vision for the game just didn't align with that particular timeline. Um, so to bring in Azur, listen, this guy brings up the average age of this roster significantly,
Yeah.
but he could potentially be, a second coming of Dexter. I'm not saying that Dexter's like the most profound in-game leader, but he could be another reason for organizations to look outside of the European region or North America for that matter in terms of looking for in-game leading talent, because Dexter, it took a while before he got MOUZ up and running. It probably will be a kind of similar timeline for Azur in my eyes, and I don't think he's gonna have enough time to make this roster look good, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, hopefully the org bears in mind that if he needs a while to get up and running, he's also got a bunch of young kids. You got time to get him up and running. Like, you don't have a pre-made major winning roster. Oh my word, that was so hard to say. Yeah, they don't have a factory packed. Here you go. Here's 4x major wins. This isn't Vitality, is it? Like it's a bunch of kids. Like you probably give him a good 6 to 8 months. But I do think, yeah, RMR gonna be dangerous. Who else you got in the RMRA?
Well, here I go. GamerLegion. Listen, I thought they were a solid upset team towards in 2022, and the fact that they were able to get to a major in the first place, kind of crazy. In like that wasn't the expectations of the roster. They were just trying things out, and they happened to make it through the last rounds of the RMRs. I like the GamerLegion roster. I love Shui in particular as an in-game leader. I felt like it was a complete. I feel like MOUZ fumbled the bag, not holding on to him as an in-game leader, potentially to either move into the main roster or sell him to someone else. Considering in-game leaders are, they're kind of hard to come by at a reasonable cost. I always thought that was such a steal for this GamerLegion roster, and I like the players on the team. I think it's just about as simple as that, to be honest. Again, maybe I've got a soft spot for international teams to be fair, but I think they could do some damage to teams that are. I mean, they're going to be prepared for some of the gimmicks, and they're going to be prepared for GamerLegion to come out swinging, but I still don't think that will be enough.
GamerLegion's a tough one for me because there's just some question marks for me because I like almost the entire roster, but then I don't really like Kios and Isaac at this level. Like they have their own little strengths, the way they play, they fit in. It's just I can't be dealing with the way Kios plays sometimes in a tier 1 team, and I don't think Isaac's just strong enough to be playing in these events. So I have problems with them. I agree with you 100% on Shui. Like he was probably like, in terms of like market value, one of the most valuable players in all of tier 2 before he was let go to GamerLegion of all things. Like MOUZ Sports had really a golden goose there. So the fact that he's not commanded a bigger buyout or even a promotion to the main team, which hell, make the roles make no sense if you want to keep Dexter alongside him. I don't care. You've got to keep Shui. Like he was the next guy. But hey, this GamerLegion side, they rocked the boat a little bit last time. I think no one's going to give them as many Infernos this time. I don't think they're going to be able to really do a whole lot. But I agree. Roster on paper, scary. Especially if you're going to frag with them. Like if you try to out-frag them, you might have some issues.
Yeah, just as a side note as well, I'm kind of an A-core believer. I always felt like his circumstances were a little bit unideal, considering his departure from what was Mad Lions into MOUZ, where he thinks he's going to be working with Karrigan, then Karrigan jumped ship. I just felt like he got handed a pretty poor circumstance, considering he was actually like a prospective AWPer at one point or another, and then after MOUZ, people just kind of slept on him. Mainly because even if the structure doesn't work, I guess you should still kill people with an AWP, probably. But
you should, yeah.
Yeah, it felt like that team was undergoing a lot of inner turmoil. Rops was also just not playing with the team ever. So I think there was some internal politics that had to be ironed out.
I believe A-Core himself released a statement about that stuff, about there being literally zero structure to anything, like him being told to just improvise, and he kind of just gave up. Like,
nice.
It was apparently an awful experience. So let's bring this to a close with my final RMRA underdog, and I've gone with the Bait. B8 Bait. They are so weird because most of the year you forget they fucking exist, and then you come round to an RMR and oh my god, they've qualified again. Let's see how good they look this time. Like they're just constantly a thorn in your side in all these open qualifier events, and they keep making it through. Now, their roster doesn't exactly have a depth of known talent. There's Wrinkle, who people know can cause an issue. Owner, who is their fragging IGL, who actually is pretty impressive. Like the stats he puts up, considering what he does, which is lead on a tier 2 team with lacking talent. And I think Alex666 has caught my eye a couple times as like a tidy little player. But aside from that, there's not much else going on. It's just that they're one of those CIS teams who play slightly offbeat, in your face, just generally annoying. And I've decided to take a stab on them because I'd rather talk about them for 5 minutes than all these other teams who are probably also just going to go 2 and 3. So I kind of like these guys. I think they're going to be a bit of an odd one. It's going to be one to keep an eye on, like maybe like a little underdog story if they actually do make a deep run. But no, it's not exactly the most typically stacked roster that we usually pick as an underdog in these events.
Yeah, I find Bait interesting because I thought with the roster instability and them being unsure about who they were going to field as their 5th man on Navi, I thought for sure one of these players was going to get snatched up. I don't know if they trialed them, if they even thought about it really, because it feels like they're sticking with what they know. You know, working with the junior squad or the academy team. They understand that's a very understood quantity in terms of what they're getting themselves into and where the issues lie. Whereas if they pull one of these players out, sure, like positionally they might fit into the team. It might work out. Personality, maybe there's a conflict there. Maybe there's things they need to learn. Like they'd have to work that out over a longer period of time. So I could see why that might have kind of escaped them. But I I actually thought, you know, even players like Captain Kirka might have been snatched up just because he's at least got a different perspective on how they should approach the game. Like he's, I think, a more supportive player from what I've watched. I've watched very limited bait demos, bait games in general, because like you said, you do often forget they kind of exist. Um, but you know, it felt like it was either him or owner for me that would make the move up, and it just hasn't happened. So I'm kind of, I don't believe with you, but I do think that if they cause a decent amount of upsets, I'm honestly just hoping that they are thought about in that light for Navi, in terms of being a potential future pickup, because now they're just not even going outside of their organization in terms of fielding players, and these guys are a full Ukrainian team. Like you should be ideally probably snatching these guys into your roster.
100%. Yeah, this is a weird one because I think I heard one person talk about owner potentially coming in, because owner being the caller, being like a kind of logical replacement. But it was something that was just talked about. It was never actually like rumored to be happening. There was nothing really going on behind the scenes that anyone leaked. It was just, that would be a cool idea. But I don't think Navi have ever really taken them that seriously. So
Also, just for the backstory, Bait are actually an organization that's owned by Dendi, who's a pro Dota player and has won TIs with them before, with Navi particularly
oh
before.
really?
So it's not like they don't know, they don't have connections, and they don't, you know,
Yeah.
they have a previous relationship with the owner of Bait. So theoretically, it should be a simple move, but
Yeah.
just something to think about.
That's a weird one. That's a really weird one. Yeah, before we move on from BLAST RMRs, though, because we are going to keep a pretty frenetic pace throughout this episode. Apologies if anything seems kind of sudden. Let's just touch on, I think, one team we haven't mentioned who deserve to be talked about, MOUZ Sports. You didn't pick them as a favourite. What's holding you back from that?
I just, yeah, in terms of marking them as favorites, I struggle. I guess I am a MOUZ hater to a certain degree. Like,
Right.
first off, Bemis is still floating in the ether. Don't know what he's up to. Hope he's all right. But I like Frozen. I've come to appreciate Dexter as well. I think it took a while for his in-game leading to get there, but he has some solid rounds himself as well in sometimes critical moments. And Zershin is very solid. I do like this roster. I'm warming up to it, but I still would struggle to mark them as favorites. Like in terms of the ceiling I see them hitting, and I know Rio, obviously they make it pretty deep into the playoffs. Um, well, they make it to semis, right? I think that was the end of their journey.
Yeah.
I I still think if we're going to discredit or discount the real result for some teams, respective, the winners, for example, that MOUZ are kind of lumped into that same category. And I haven't seen the consistency continue coming into this year enough for me to be with them. I think they'll make it out of the RMR, but I feel like I had to pick Fnatic over them actually. So I don't think there's any real thing holding them back in my head really.
Okay. Well, they had an alright showing at Pro League, but I didn't think, obviously, the way I picked, didn't even need to consider them. But they are, yeah, they made it out of groups and they went out in playoffs. They got one playoff win, but then you look who they beat and who they lost, like, it just all made sense. It's like, yeah, they weren't supposed to beat Heroic or Cloud9. You are supposed to beat Pain. And I guess the Furia win's nice, but as we've seen since, Furia are really not in a good place now. Like, to be honest, we kind of got that idea before that. They weren't great outside of the Rio Major last year. And this year they've been pretty awful. So, yeah, maybe MOUZ are just beating who they're supposed to beat, losing who they're supposed to lose, which could bode well, but it also doesn't show us some overwhelming level of play. Like, they're not able to really step things up. They could be upset. That's kind of thing what we're scared of here, is that their level just being good enough may not be what we need to see when they actually get into the higher pressure moments against teams doing crazy random bollocks in a best of one on a map they weren't expecting. So, for me, that's why I probably wouldn't have picked them either. Although, the options after you get past FaZe and NAVI aren't that rich in RMRA.
Yeah, I think RMRA is destined for some upsets, to be quite honest. Just in terms of instability of rosters. So I'm kind of there with you. RMRB though, kind of stacked.
Oh yeah, it is stacked, especially with the step up of, well, one of the teams I think I will be mentioning. But let's start with your first pick in RMRB as your favourites. Bring it home. Who have you got?
All right, I've picked Heroic. I kind of alluded to this earlier. I picked Outsiders. I picked Heroic, or I picked VirtusPro. I'm gonna have to get used to saying VirtusPro now again because we're reintegrating the organization.
The war is over. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, no, that's just not true. For VirtusPro, Heroic, I have them down as some of the most consistent teams in Tier 1, just because I think the games that they're supposed to win, they do, and the games that are difficult, they sometimes struggle. Sometimes they might just win the game, and then that's considered an upset. I don't think their floor descends much lower than Tier 1 teams that we see consistently in playoffs, and therefore I just don't think they're. God, I was about to say I don't think they're going to get upset, and it's just I'm recalling all the other times I've picked Outsiders in other events, and thought, yeah, they're a pretty solid 3-2 team, which means that there are certain upsets or certain losses in that run.
Yeah.
But I think they'll have a better record here at this RMR. I think they've locked in their baseline good enough that they shouldn't struggle with any of the teams really.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. I don't think they fail to make it out of this group. I think they might have an odd match, like a 2-0 game against someone good. People are like, oh, okay, they could have made it through 3-0, but they didn't, against the likes of a Cloud9, a Big, an ENCE. I don't think Big are going to do anything, but that's just an example. Like, just the upper side of this pretty stacked group. I think they could have a best of 3 loss somewhere in there, but otherwise they should get clean through. Even the opening game against 500, you should be able to use your pretty extensive map pool to get them onto something weaker and then just slaughter them. They're not stacked as much as they may look it online because they just win so many events and games online. They have 2 complete duds on that roster.
Yeah.
If you're Heroic, you should be able to outfrag them any day of the week.
Yeah, I had also realized that in talking about Heroic, I ended up talking about VirtusPro. But, Heroic, Stown, solid, Cadian, clutch as hell, Tessus. I don't think these guys really need an introduction. They're solid in their roles. They have real pop-off games, and even if some lag behind, others compensate. I feel like they have a very strong balance, regardless of what happens in a game. So that's my justification for it. I'm sorry if any Heroic fans listening. I ended up just not talking about your team when I picked them. So, but they should be a comfortable pick for me. There's no real reason they shouldn't make it out.
Yeah, Heroic, easy peasy. Which same, I think, for my first pick on RMRB, and that's Cloud9. We just saw them make the final of Pro League. And yes, they have a style which I've described as upsettable in the past, because they're going to give you fights, they're going to give you duels, and if you're a stacked Mongolian team, for example, you might just win enough of those duels to beat them 16-14, 16-14. Like, that just can happen. And we've seen them fail at prior like majors in the early stages. I'm just not convinced this is going to happen again. Cloud9 were slightly better at actually flashing for fights in the Pro League. Like, watching the final, I think I've charted 2 of the 4 maps now for a video. I've actually gone through them pretty extensively, and watching the demos back, you're like, yeah, okay, I'm seeing far more of just the basic, just flash before you peek, that, for crying out loud. Like, some of the stuff that you saw them in the past maybe not do, where they just dry walk into stuff. So I think they're going to be looking less upsettable at this event. They're still strong. They've still got one of the best 2 or 3 AWPers, one of the best 2 riflers in the world right now. This should be comfortable. I'm taking Cloud9. I'm pretty sure they're going 3-0.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of right there with you. You snatched this, and I couldn't pick it, right? So, yeah, I like Cloud9. I've always had a soft spot for them, and this time it feels different. Like, it feels like we've undergone enough scrutiny and enough that the calling feels like it has more of a hierarchy from the games that I've watched. Because I think in their come up, they were a very default heavy team, and they're probably one of the best teams in the world at slow working defaults on T sides. That being said, their defaults do extend pretty aggressively. They're just trying to link up with each other a bit better in terms of throwing utility for one another. And I do wonder whether that has to do with Inter's leaving, because if somebody wanted to make a play, an aggro play, typically it would be just Inter's like kind of coupled with them for some of these aggro moves, and that was the way they tried to facilitate it. Like, Inter's was the only one that could throw the perfect flash for you to get this entry, but now other players are sort of shouldering some of those responsibilities. And I think it was Hobbit on the EPL desk was saying that when it came to keeping calm, Buster is probably the best guy for the job. Like, this guy just doesn't care. He's so incredibly stoic. You tell him to do something, he'll do it. And maybe that's all the training that he received under the leadership of James, who would often make him and Kicker to just kind of do his bidding.
Yeah, that's entirely valid, because there were times on those old James rosters where I would watch, especially Kicker, just run in through stuff, and I'm like, there's no way you wanted to do that. Like, go through 3 Molotovs, a HE, and a smoke just to dink someone with a MAC-10. Like, there's no way that was your goal in this round. But it facilitated something else. It made sense within the greater context. And hopefully that's what it is, and hopefully it's a bit of his presence and influence that's also, I think, given them the feeling that, yeah, we can make a little more team play happen, like link up in these more beneficial ways. They still take bloody forever to do anything. Yeah. That's not changed. They're still taking like a minute and a half to go 15 feet. Like, that's still annoying, but...
And I watched a game literally today. I was casting a game literally today where they were running out of time trying to get bomb plants down on Vertigo, which is a map that has been a staple for a long time. Like, they lost, I think they were on a 12-game winning streak on that map until NIP stole it away from them like 12 to or 16 to 8, which is not something that we were expecting coming into that particular broadcast. But the way that they were playing their T side was, it just wasn't pretty. Just so slow in making a decision, and by the time they did, they were jumping into executes, getting nades out of their hands at the 20-second mark and making it up that ramp corner and over short. There is literally no room for error, and they made some errors, and they were punished for it. So
yeah, it costs them every time, doesn't it? It really does. I saw it in the EPL final as well. There are some key rounds in both the first 2 maps, just immediately, where they just lose straight up because they don't give themselves another option other than to go in and win. But sticking with the RMRB favourites, you have another pick. Who have you gone with?
I have gone with Vitality. Now, Vitality are a weird one for me, personally, because I actually enjoyed the Jax stand-in at EPL. He was a really aggressive rifler for them, and I felt like it just unlocked the rest of the roster. And Benning and Dupree coming into the playoffs, regardless of how well you did or what you may have learned from using Jax and how you're going to try and facilitate or bring in dupreeh to almost have that same energy so that the rest of the squad can feel comfortable, being pushed into the playoffs after not playing any of the group stage games is always going to be like an awkward transition. I feel like no team is going to survive that properly. Um, I guess unless you're FaZe somehow. So I I still like that they probably learned some lessons about what works and what's comfortable. Because if they suddenly have a high, if dupreeh is more aggressive, it feels as though the rest of the roles do kind of make sense. And listen, dupreeh, we're not expecting him to become some god level entry, but just creating that room, even if Jax didn't find his kill, that was just it felt like it felt like enough, and the vitality system all slotted into place. So I I'm kind of in anticipation. First off, I think Spinks, ZywOo, just more than solid. I mean, some of the best in the world in their positions. And Spinks, while I was critical of him initially, has developed under leadership, and I think Apex is also kind of changing the way he thinks about what his position is going to be. Especially, like, he knows he's calling, but just how he's going to approach fights. Because I don't think I saw him throwing himself away quite as much come UPL.
Yeah, less of a gambler, I think, is the way to think about it. Because he, in the past, I think one of the most annoying things about him was it worked at times. Was he would just run down mid as a CT on Inferno, and he'd do it unplanned, just mid round. You just push it. And you're like, great, it worked out this time, but the next game you died for nothing, gave away an advantage, and you lost the round. And there's a little less of that. There's still some. He's still Apex. He's still batshit insane, but he seems to have reined in some like parts of it to actually be, I think, just a more rational player, not just a player who thinks about what other people are doing. He's also put more thought into himself, so that's been good. That's been a slight improvement, I think, for Vitality. But I have to say, yeah, they did not look as good with dupreeh. Of course, it's not all dupreeh's fault. As you said, there's extenuating circumstances. He wasn't there for the groups. Honestly, I would have not have taken Vitality. If I had to rank the 5 teams I would take in this group, they were 5th. Okay. They were actually 5th. Because I prefer the team I picked, and I prefer the other team that we're going to have to discuss afterwards. So let's move on to that. Actually, I'm going to move on to my picks. I'm quite excited to talk about it, because I love talking about this team, and especially their IGL, and that's ENCE. Led by, I think literally the IGL I've talked the most about in Counter-Strike. Like, as just the pure like gameplay wise, I've talked the most about Snappy in my entire time following this game. I think it's sensational what he's achieved, like bringing Nerds in and making immediate strides, like immediate like improvement, clear improvement on results, but also just finding better ways of using everyone immediately within this new system he's had to figure out. I think it's been an amazing ride. ENCE have looked not quite back to their best. Obviously, their best was a major semi-final with the likes of Spinks. Maybe that's reaching for the stars to see them go all the way again, like that deep this time. But the fact that they made the semis at Pro League, they were able to upset G2 and Vitality, whilst having different players step up, different players making huge plays, and they've been able to be very successful considering they had a huge roster turnaround, while still having a go-to iconic map in Nuke. They did lose it to Vitality, but in general, still have like a go-to map they generally beat everyone on. I think it speaks volumes about leadership in that sense, that you've been able to change everything up and yet keep certain key parts of your game completely the same. So, huge credit to Snappy. Love the individual in this team. I think they're going to breeze through this RMR, and hopefully they'll make another deep run at another big major.
Yeah, no, I've definitely noticed that I have biases towards ENCE, because when they obviously were trying to make the Valde and Sampaius move work, they probably looked the worst that the ENCE core has in quite some time. And I did wonder whether that was Snappy making that call to bring in Valde. Trying to go 1-for-1 with players that are clearly stars and trying to transition players that hadn't been in some time. Didn't feel like it made any sense. So I lost my faith in ENCE for a decent amount of time, but I do agree the results and the way that they have been playing are it does just make sense. You know, they've obviously tried to facilitate and work around this Nerds edition as opposed to just simply slotting him into a role and saying you have to do this. They haven't pigeonholed him, and I I think the one person I'm a little bit iffy on still is Pius, who I don't think has unlocked another level just yet. Like he over the years before he joined ENCE, it felt like he was seeing steady improvements year on year in terms of what he needed to do in rounds, how he had to position himself, how he reads what's coming his way, especially if there's going to be like an execute and dodging flashes or understanding that it's likely to be a Molotov landing at your feet. I felt like he learned everything each year. I feel like he is pretty much the same guy on this ENCE roster as when he first joined, and I need I wanted to see continual development from him because it felt like he was upward trending, even though technically, the longer you're in the circuit, the less your value is kind of projected to be because at a certain point you plateau and then you fall off. But Sampaius has just maintained, and maybe that's enough to be fair.
Yeah, that's kind of my rationale on that. So sometimes if
Mhm.
this is his plateau, like giving you like a 1.15, solid rating, solid performance, not too active on the T side. So a criticism that really came down to the system in Movistar Rise more than anything, but still in ENCE you see a bit of that, nade dispenser approach.
Mhm.
But overall, yeah, I'm happy enough with what he does. He brings enough to not be a liability by any means, and to even have really huge impact maps. So yeah, Sunpire's plenty good enough for this ENCE roster right now. So yeah, those are the favourites. Should we talk about G2 first or the underdogs? I'm not sure what's more important here. I think G2 needs to be touched on. You didn't take them. I
Yeah.
didn't take them. Are they no longer good? Like, what's going on?
I'm gonna be honest. I don't even think there's a reason why I didn't pick these guys. I just simply valued the two picks that I had over them. I still think they'll make it through. I again, credit to the Hooksy and Nico, Monacy, all of them really coming together to make this work. Because Nico back to his rifling ways, and Monacy just it's very clear that he leveled up once Hooksy came to be a part of this roster. They're good enough. I do think the ENCE result kind of shakes me a bit, just considering they were probably one of the favorites I would have had to make it through to the playoffs, or like a deep run into the playoffs rather. But yeah, no, the team is fine. I think they're still fine. There's no reason to panic. It's just yeah, trying to be a little bit. I guess I'm just trying to be a bit weird with my picks.
Okay. Yeah, for me, the rationale was simple. I would have taken them if you'd taken ENCE. Like, if I had to choose between them and Vitality, like, I'd take them.
Okay.
But no, I much prefer ENCE. I'm always happy to take a snappy led side. And yeah, they're obviously still ridiculously stacked, skilled, with plenty enough to make it through this. It's just, yeah, they weren't my priority when it came to picking here. I think, yeah, losing 2-0, you'd want to see at least a map. And so I think that's what shakes everyone's confidence, the fact they didn't take a map. Like, they were close on the first one, but they didn't take either one. I think that's what's got people a bit yeah, iffy about G2, but overall they're still, I think comfortably we can say, amongst the favourites to make it through this RMR, even though this one is slightly more stacked at the top than RMRA is.
Yeah, I would say if they make it through the RMR and they get to the major, I think their win condition is simply going to be Nico wants a major. Like
Right.
he needs the major. Like if I don't see a number one rifler in the world performance from Nico, I feel like it's not gonna happen for G2 because I don't know that I can fully if I can fully get behind G2 with that pressure on them. Crowd great. They did so at Katowice, but I need to see players like JKS as well, just like not. I need to see this roster just simply unfazed by the pressure of potentially winning a major, because that feels like something that they haven't gone through yet.
Okay, yeah, well, it'll be another round of, what's it called? When you heat treat a sword? It's got a name. Tempering.
Tempering.
Yeah. It's like that. We'll see how well tempered the sword is. Like, if the flames of Katowice, if that heat was enough to really solidify them, they can take a couple dinks, take a few hits, like they did at Pro League, fall down, but then just be able to just bounce straight back, keep on swinging, keep on slaying, and make it through this one. Let's get into underdogs. So it's been 50 minutes, and we're still in Europe.
Yeah,
This is going to be a mighty episode. We
can speed through Americas.
Yeah, we can speed through it. Just say they're all trash and move on to Asia, right? That's going to be.
Oh wow.
That's going to be it. But underdogs quickly. All right, RMRB, your underdog picks.
Mine is 9. I think it's a very logical pick. They're an underdog. They're a newer team. They made the addition of Hades, but weirdly enough, people are like, "Oh my god, Hades made this team much better." He did, but he's not the one that's doing the damage. It feels like everybody, like in the rifling side, has leveled up since the addition of Hades. I don't know how it's happened, what's going on, whether he's providing some insight from his time on ENCE or what. But Kai, which apparently his name is said, okay, it's like Keish or something, but it's like, I think he spelt it to me with like a J at the end, so like K. But people don't call him K, they call him Kai. And he said, I asked him what his preference was. Kai, apparently, is how he'd prefer his name to be said. Whatever. I'm not judging.
I've always called him Kai.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why you call him Kai. It's Kei.
Yeah, but he's not English, is he?
That doesn't.
I don't know. It just read to me like Kai. Like, I don't know.
And apparently other commentators have also made that. So, he's just kind of settled Kai is how it goes. Anyway, those two on rifling for this team are exceptional and have been a big reason as to why they've qualified for, I made it through the qualifiers for every event that they've basically taken part in. So it's they're a cool team to watch because it felt like we were really getting to see Polish CS rise out from the ashes once again. And maybe it's not the names that many would remember, but at least Polish CS has something to be excited about.
Yeah, they've been really cool, really awesome. They beat Fnatic, was it yesterday, in a best of 3, which was impressive, but considering Fnatic's online form, predictable. Yeah, 9 are an impressive one. They're a really good pick. There's a lot of good tier 2 picks in this RMR. So that's one of them. Probably the best one officially, according to the rankings. But definitely a dangerous squad. As you said, Hades doesn't feel like is the real leading factor behind this explosion from them. It's those two you mentioned, plus Goofy. Just everything seems to go right on teams Goofy plays on. He's not the caller, he's never the superstar, and yet everything just seems to click. So I think he's probably one of those hidden gems who's doing a lot that we're not paying enough attention to really notice. Because his ratings are solid, his team keeps getting dubs. What's going on there? Goofy's another one who deserves, I think, a bit of recognition.
Maybe a spiritual Jax or something, like it just keeps the vibes nice.
Yeah, maybe it's the vibes. It's the vibes. Or it's I'm not going to get into the edgy jokes. Yeah. Let's go straight into my pick. I've taken Monte, who are a really strange side. They started off as just a pug mix, essentially. Sure, they had an org, but they were a messy pug mix with 2 AWPers, no IGL, and just it made no sense. And they've slowly improved the roster. Sure, they removed Joel, who, as we all know, is the second coming of whoever you believe in. It's Joel. But they made some logical additions. They brought in SDY when NAVI got rid of him, and that has just taken them from tier 2 scary to borderline tier 1. They can challenge tier 1 sides and frag with them and have just the right roles in place. It's overall a really scary side. They just won ESEA Advanced, I believe, and qualified for Pro League. I'm just double checking.
ESL Challenger League. Then,
ESL Challenger they just won and qualified, yeah. So that's awesome. They also won another cup, yesterday? Yeah, yesterday. They're in amazing form going into this RMR. And they're terrifying. Oros is going to rip everyone's heads off. Aurora 2K calling and sniping has been strangely impactful. And yeah, across the board, they've got solid players and really, I think, scary high-end fraggers. Like, their top end is super scary.
It's fun because they're like a pan-Euro version of Bad News Eagles. Like they're very much like a limit test team in my book, and any team that is got a gap in their defenses in their defensive setups, or they try and do something too crazy or go for double pushes somewhere, they'll find. I feel like Monte find out faster than any team basically out there. And listen, Some Die Young didn't have the most impressive results with Navi, but has been a kind of a beast to be reckoned with when it's come to the games that Montes have played as well. You know, it's not just all these other star players. Like I was always very high on DemQ when he was with, I think it was Crazy before, or
Yeah,
I forget what they were called even before that.
I think
Um,
you're on the right lens, yeah.
yeah.
Oh no,
Before,
he was on Akuma.
yeah, he was on Akuma, but that
Then he
was
was on
after the
Bait.
crazy. Yeah, okay. But he was before those.
Oh, you mean
Yeah.
Crazy
He's
Project
like,
X cult these rosters?
yeah. I liked him way
Gotcha.
back then because even him and Sensei were. I was looking at them as being sort of the next ones up. Obviously,
Hmm.
all that Akuma stuff happened, and anybody that looked at them in the higher ups, especially Navi, were like, "Yeah, well, did it against us, so we hate every single one of you. Unlucky." Um, they could have also been feasible choices to make a move to that squad.
100%.
But DemQ is a very, very solid rifler, has had some like mechanically very gifted. Maybe not the star on this roster, you know, outshined by Boros who just go out headshot. But DemQ, I feel like is that one leadership figure away from being a weapon, an absolute weapon.
Okay. Yeah, DMQ has obviously not been the focus of my attention on this roster. I mean, Boros, there's a beautiful simplicity to the way he plays on T side of just never stop. I'm just going to continually take fights. And if the IGL's right, he'll point me in the right direction of how to take these fights sometimes, because otherwise I will just run out and take fights. But it's beautifully simple, and he will headshot anyone who dares be on his screen. So yeah, very fun team to watch. Your second underdog, we got more tier 2 bangers here. Who have you picked?
Aurora. Well, first off, we have to also mention that the way we did who was overdogs or who were favorites and who were underdogs is based on where they're seated on the HLTV rankings. So fours was kind of out of the question. Unfortunately, they had a good enough run at Pro League that they're
Yep.
kind of up at the moment. So maybe would have picked them, but the player swaps and moves between Aurora, VirtusPro, and fours all seem to have kind of worked, and it was a quick little shimmy, a quick little shuffle. I I like the guys on Aurora. I thought even with the old roster they were gonna do more damage than they did, but listen, Norway is a really solid player. Kenzie as well. For them to immediately bounce back after not being able to find so much success with fours is just it's kind of crazy to me that it works so seamlessly because I think Lackey is still in-game leading for this squad, but he has taken a backseat because he was one of the initial members for the Aurora project, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because I think it's like Starix led. But he was always inserting himself in the middle of the map, kind of similar to what Tabson used to do. Has also taken a backseat to that, and he's just letting these guys do their work and calling a more macro game. And God, I feel like Aurora are arguably one of the best teams in tier 2. If nine didn't exist, I'd maybe put them right there with them.
Oh yeah, they're monsters. And it comes down to a lot of it does feel like they just have, at any given moment, 2 or 3 of the best 4 players on the server. Because Kenzie and Norway on the rifles, ridiculous. And Latic quietly goes about his business in that sort of reluctant shift walk, CIS Orpa style, never too close to the front, but always ready to clean things up. And they really are just scary on that firepower front, especially online where you're not expecting them, maybe not prepped for them properly, and they just run out, rip your heads out, like rip 3 heads, and you're done. You're like, that's round. All right, cool. Thanks, Norway. Yeah, they've been absolutely dominant at times. I think earlier in the year they had a period where I think they were on a ridiculous win streak.
They're like
in tier
8. I
2.
think it was like 16 out of 18 best of threes or something. Like they might have had like one
Yeah.
interrupted in there.
Yeah, it was
Top
very
streak.
it was very impressive. It really caught everyone's eye. So I think solid pick there. There's nothing really to fold about it. Sure, obviously experience lacking. Oh, they don't have the greatest idea. Yeah, of course, we're talking tier 2 teams here.
But
like
that's why they're underdogs.
exactly, like great underdog pick. All right, my underdog final one. It's the team I kind of roasted a little bit earlier. It's 500. Now I said they have 2 duds, and by that I meant fragging. Obviously, like Nikki and Patrick are not going to set the world on fire, but with Denislav, Rainwaker, and Ships, the incredible mess of a player that guy is, all over the shop. Never know if he's going to win you the game or lose it, but at least he's fun to watch. I think they're just going to be a fun team to follow. And in the past, when this roster was, we had Bubble, I believe, and Dreamer, they played one of the most. I've begun to call it the Bulgarian style because every team seems to play like this from that region. Just this weird, offbeat, off-meta style of like hard lurkers with heavy set executes, and it's so old, and yet no one seems to really be able to counter it because they just do it really, really damn well. So 500, always a threat, these Bulgarian sides that lands. I think if you notice, if you go back in time, look at like Fiend, look at Windigo, they always show up at lands and just upset people. I think it's because they have such a well-drilled understanding of their own systems and the way they're supposed to be playing. They're like, who's doing what, whose role is what. I think 500 can be scary. You're going to need to see Rainwaker, tier 2's best closer, like step the hell up and really deliver some huge moments, as well as some consistency out of Ships and Denislav for them to even sniff coming through this group. But I think they're going to be an interesting one to watch. They're going to have some fun games. It's a shame that they can't go into the old Bulgarian Dust 2 Classic, but at least they're going to have some good showings on maps like Inferno, because that sort of stuff's definitely going to come through the map pool, and they are very threatening on it. So yeah, 500 should scare some people. I don't think they're going to actually like go 3-0, explode everyone. Like there's no potential for that, unlike 9, Monte, Aurora, all those teams. If they go the fuck off, they can just go 3-0. This team can't, I think, but they will definitely still be an interesting one to watch.
Yeah, I think it's there. I'm not really sold on 500 simply because I get that there's a method to the madness, but when things break down, they break down and they absolutely shatter. Like the fact that they run heavy lurks. If those players could, like, I've seen, I think, too many games where they just lose that lurk and then there's kind of nothing else in the tank. As far as what happens next, it's all very sporadic, which I think is most teams when it comes to, set up for a default and, oh, well, now we can't do the thing that we had planned for the round. But I just don't think that plan B for 500 ever looks pretty. They are a team that somehow with good structure end up in very chaotic, scrappy games very frequently. I could see it. I certainly respect the Bulgarian hustle because these guys they're always hustling in events like this. But yeah, I don't think I've seen enough out of the new additions to make it feasible. Like I feel like you need the extra depth in this RMR.
Fair enough. To be honest, when I looked at the rest of the teams I considered legitimate underdogs, I thought, I'm never picking iNation in 100 years. And Eternal Fire probably make more sense, but they're less interesting to talk about.
Right.
They're just less interesting to talk about. So I was like, yeah, you know what? I want to go with the team I like. I've made a video about Rainwaker. Just shameless plug.
It's your channel.
Therefore, he must, always be mentioned and chosen and celebrated, no matter how small his accomplishment. So that's 500 as my pick to close it out. And we move into everyone's favourite region, America. Yeah, there we go. There's the round of applause I was expecting. Thank you, audience, for clapping along.
I forgot to clap. My fault.
Yeah, America. Also known as the Brazilian RMR plus 2 invites, right? It's quite a state that the region's in. And you know what? I'm going to go first on this pick. Sorry, yeah?
Okay.
No,
I was just going to add, we got news and it's been, kind of confirmed. EG are also going to be at this RMR. Not that it affects any of our picks, but I just thought I'd mention
it changes anything.
Yeah, Detonate, unfortunately, they couldn't make it, so too many substitutes needed.
Yeah, what an unfortunate situation for Detonate. and also everyone who has to watch.
Also, Kassad's out of money. Didn't he pay TeamOne or play like he had some bet about which team was going to eliminate them from the RMR? Getting rid of EG from the RMRs, and then I assume he paid out.
No, he did. He did. Yeah.
Yeah, he's out of money for a bounty that ultimately was renegotiated or something. So.
To be fair, yeah, they did. They shot the guy, they killed him, they got the bounty, and then it's just someone like Frankenstein
resurrected
came along and
them
just
somehow.
just lightning bolts and brought them back. It's like, oh, they kind of did their job. We'll get into that in a bit. I'm going to pick first. Well, I'm going to announce my pick first. We already did these picks a while ago. I took. Oh wow, this pick feels bad now, having seen the recent results. Furia, the Brazilian mighty Jaguars. I think that's what that's supposed to be, Jaguar. They are. God damn annoying to follow and root for at times. Because you're like, yeah, I really like Yuri. Keisarato's a monster. Why is this team never work? God damn it. Every time we're on this show, it's like, this is good. This is good. They've also got the Yorpa figured out. And Drop's finding his place. How are they still not winning anything? And we're back here again. They somehow lost to EG in a best of 3. Not even EG's first team. It was one of the other EG teams. I forget how many there are now and which one's which. They lost to one of the other ones. I think the men's team. How?
EG Black, yeah.
Ow. It's so frustrating. I think they'll make it through the RMR just because I think they're a LAN team. This is the logic I'm going to cling to. Mm-hmm. But there's not much to go off in the terms of the history books, is there? There's not much that's promising right now about this Furia roster.
Yeah, I mean, in recent times, lost to Big, lost to IHC.
Well, that's a tough game.
Game. I mean, listen, I like IHC, but I probably wouldn't have put them over them. No. Lose to MOUZ, and they've lost to FaZe. That one's fair. I'll take a FaZe. I'll take a FaZe loss. And then the EG Black one is probably the most egregious. IHC beat EG, and they weren't even pleased about it. The main EG team, not the secondary team.
Yeah.
So I'm also in a weird spot about Furia. I don't know if that's just them playing that out and just thinking, oh well, this isn't the most important game in the world. Who cares about EG Black? We'll just do whatever we want. Save strats for the major. That we're not going to go over any of the stuff we worked on because we shouldn't need it versus a team like this. Maybe that was part of the thinking, but you should have still been able to close it out. As soon as you lose a map in the series, that's when you pull the socks up. So
yeah, there's a good chance they half-assed it. It wouldn't be the first time a tier 1 team lost to some relatively crap team because they basically didn't try. But this is the BLAST showdown, isn't it? This matters for something. Come on. You shouldn't be half-assing this.
I think this is something that teams are guilty of, unfortunately, where, especially after a long, grueling pro league, where it's several weeks out of your calendar, then you're thrown into an online event where the stakes are high. It does have importance, but they've committed their resources elsewhere, and I just think they came in a little bit sleepy-eyed, didn't really care as much. I don't know, I don't want to discredit that from EG Black, but you're not supposed to win that game, and Furia just didn't make it as difficult as they probably should have. So I don't hate the Furia pick. I would have still picked them as well moving into this RMR, to be quite honest, but
they should make it through. Right?
They are in a weird spot.
Such an annoying team. Anyway, your pick. I think people can figure out who you've taken. Who's your first favorite?
Liquid. Yeah, this is where we started to find and pull some priority. Funnily enough, I've gone with American teams for the Americas RMR. I like Liquid enough. I think OC has been able to find the form that he needs to. Yukindar. Not as high impact as when he first joined this roster. Not having, I think, the same sort of crazy rounds. But I think that was always naturally going to happen. He was sort of dressed to impress during the trial period. And now they have to more sensibly think about how they make something work out of the pieces that they've got. He's still really, really solid. He'll still find you entries. He'll still win you rounds. but I think he has taken a step back from just being hyper aggressive all of the time and there being no game plan after that when he dies. So
Yeah.
I think this Liquid team have leveled up and just understood what they need to make those adaptations, which is I think in a previous prediction thing we did, we talked about how it didn't seem like they had, an underlying structure, and so yeah, I like the squad. Liquid, there shouldn't be any problems. I think their main issue will probably be a team like Furia. So
Well, on current form, recent history's shown us Pain probably not the best opponent for them either. They are currently playing them now, and they are one map down. But that's also the team that knocked them out of Pro League. Just on a side note.
Yeah.
But thankfully, there's only 2 or 3 teams at that level like this RMR. Everyone else is, on paper, far beneath them. Liquid still trying to get more out of Elige. I think that's still the stone they're trying to wring water out of, is Elige, the person. Just trying to squeeze something, like another good performance, another good year maybe out of him. Because it's been rough. He's made some of the most fraudulent HLTV top 20 appearances, I think, in the history of that ranking. He's not been the same player. But no, yeah. Yekindar, you say he's having less impactful, general maps. He's also having fewer maps where his impact goes completely the opposite direction, where he just throws entire maps. And that's been good. That was the story that I brought up a lot when I was talking with I believe it was on Thorin's watch parties and stuff, when we had to watch Liquid. It's for example, the great example was Pro League Finals when they lost them to Vitality. He basically won them Inferno, but lost them 2 other maps. Nuke, he straight up was tanking them, dragging them to the bottom of the ocean. And that was an issue. We've not seen that as much. Sure, they still managed to lose to Pain in a best of 3 in the playoffs, which they should never, if they are the team they claim they are, they should never be doing. That being said, it's looked less stupid in the way they've lost. It's just been, alright, NAF didn't have a super performance, Pain did, they outperformed the players outperformed themselves. Alright, on to the next one. Hopefully that's the case here. They come back, breeze through the RMR, and we'll let them disappoint us in another quarterfinal at a major.
Yeah.
Back to the way things should be, right? Back to the way things should be. My second favourite is that very same team I've just mentioned, Pain. I really liked what I saw from them. I agree with myself that it was a bit of an overperformance for them to just go and 2-0 Liquid in playoffs. But the fact that they made playoffs wasn't that much of a shock to me. They're a fairly solid group of players, even though they're not the cream of the crop out of South America, or Brazil really at this point. They're still fairly talented with some really dangerous individuals with a lot to prove. So it was great to see them make the playoffs. Shame that they couldn't go any further. They ran into FaZe. You're not going to just miracle run your way through FaZe if you're Pain. That would take some next level transformation of who you are and where you can realistically aspire to be. That's not the kind of match they should be winning. But yeah, Pain, I think, should make it through this RMR pretty comfortably as well. They are in domestic competition, untouched most of the time. They're really damn good, so this should be fairly comfortable.
Yeah, there's no way you're upsetting FaZe when, they're kind of destined to get the Intel Grand Slam, so...
It was written in the script. I checked with the writers afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. We got Counter-Strike 2 coming around the corner, that Intel Grand Slam, we have no idea whether or not that's going to even transfer to the new game. So it's, yeah, no, I don't dislike Pain. They also had that, what was it, the result in ESL Challenger Melbourne 2022, which I think was the real hallmark of they can get it done. Because I think they beat Imperial in the final, if my recollection is correct. Skulls and Zevi, either way, very, very solid riflers.
Yes.
And are...
Well, Zevi's an AWPer, isn't he?
Zevi the AWPer? Oh,
yeah.
God. It's been...
It's Hardsound, Big Zero, and PKL are the other 3.
Sorry. Yeah, that's how few times I've actually caught Pain. I think after that. But either way, Skulls, Zevi, very, very solid in their positions, respectively. Skulls, I know for sure, very good on a rifle. And hell, man, I think they... I guess it's just the Brazilian style. They are a little too default heavy, in the same way that I would maybe criticize Cloud9 for maybe being a bit too default heavy. But hey, man, whatever gets you wins, that's a stylistic decision. they're also a team that like to get aggressive on CT sides. So good for them, man. Like
Yeah, they're
I
definitely
hate teams.
fun.
I hate
on
teams that
CT
play
side.
scared. So
Oh, that's the one thing you can never criticize them of being, is it? Scared.
yeah,
No, they're
exactly.
going to take every damn fight. But yeah, let's talk about your second favorite pick. They're a team that I have a very strong love-hate relationship with. You've taken...
Complexity.
Yeah.
Fang
Please.
is chill. Holzerk, honorary American. Still being able to get it done on Crazy Ping as well. I think he's been playing the Blast Showdown stuff with some like 200 ping or something, which is obviously
Fun.
unideal for an AWPer especially. But he, yeah, as soon as they added Holzerk, it felt like suddenly they could actually make a vision of the game work. They went with an AWPer that understands systems, funnily enough, and then they were suddenly able to just be good. You know, Fang's back in his usual spots like he was a long time ago with like extra salt, and yeah, I just think it makes the JT's vision of the game actually come to fruition. Also, JT himself can pull off some crazy rounds individually, which always helps having a depth of flavor in there. Yeah, I don't think there's really much more to say. I like this complexity team. Their map pool is maybe where I'd be a bit iffy on, and I think that's also a JT targeted thing there because I feel it is matchup dependent based on permabans, but they can get sort of pigeonholed into 3 maps, which I'm not a massive fan of. But aside from that, that's where extra work comes in for events like this.
Personally, I've always believed in Fang. Like, I remember analyzing his demos, looking at his mechanics, his fluidity, like everything looks really natural. Like that's what often you actually see if you ever study in depth, like the best players. It's not necessarily that everything's exactly like perfectly where a head could be, like when they pre-aim and stuff. It's just the way they move around. It's all coordinated. It's like a little dance, and it's just so natural. And that's what I felt when I watched Fang. And then to see the way his play has violently oscillated between next guy up to complete bot has basically encapsulated complexity as a roster. Like, there's times where you're like, oh, they could be the next American thing. Other times you're like, why are these guys allowed to play for complexity? Like we thought at Pro League. I'm going to be honest. That was horseshit. That was awful. Like, after a top 8 at Katowice, which wasn't the toughest like opposition they made it through to get there, but it was still an impressive result considering they're North American. And then to come into Pro League and look so damn flat, like awful, really made me just hate them again. That's what I'm saying. Like, I really want to believe in them. I want to believe that Floppy is the guy everyone seems to talk about on stream. Every caster seems to love him. I've never once watched him and thought he's amazing, and yet somehow here we are. Like, he still puts up better maps than Fang because this team makes very little sense to me. It's all over the shop. Should they make it through this? Yes. I think of the 4 favourites we've picked, they're the most likely to just shit the bed. Like, they managed to flop last time against Imperial in the end in the Americas RMR, and that was one of the most heart-wrenchingly bad performances I've ever seen. Like, in terms of like an emotional breakdown, like they just mentally fell apart.
Couldn't do it, yeah.
Just literally couldn't win a fight to save their lives. They're going to be interesting to watch. Let's just put it that way. They might look good again and go stomping through, but there's also an almost equal chance, I think we're talking coin flip, that they do just lose to borderline everyone.
I think they are definitely haunted by the fact that they know they should win games against Imperial. It's become like a weird rivalry between them because the games are often close, but
shouldn't be.
Yeah, they probably shouldn't be. Albeit this Imperial roster, I actually don't hate either. To be quite honest,
now it's not as definite.
It's gotten better. Like it's a much better. Like
they've made some rational decisions.
The Rio roster was a hard sell for me. But now I see the light at the end of the tunnel. Listen, I'm looking forward to it. I think they will get better. And listen, last major, cool story for Folden if he's able to even get there. So listen, aside from all of that, always had a soft spot for Grim. I hate when players go into rosters and they are either mistreated or given all of the terrible positions as like some
Yeah.
sort of hazing ritual. It felt like that's what he did for Liquid, and now he's actually, pulling together some pretty solid star numbers for this complexity squad. So good for him, man. That's all I can say, really.
Yeah, Grim's been one of the few consistently not awful parts of that team. So yeah, fair enough.
Took a little bit for him to come online because I think there was a small period during his early transition where like Floppy was doing really well, but then Grim wasn't having so great games. Now it's like they've suddenly, they've only got so many action points, and suddenly the scale has flipped.
Yeah, but to be fair, his lows, they were never reaching the lows I've seen from those other players in that team. They all take it in turns to just utterly revolt me. Underdogs, though, let's get positive again. Underdogs. These teams were never supposed to be good, so let's rejoice that they're 1-3. I'm going to take TeamOne, who I genuinely think are good. They're basically the roster they had before. MOUZ MD got poached for 00 Nation, and now is back there. It's a bit of a funny one. He's a player I really like. The rest of the roster I never particularly cared for, but I've picked them exclusively because that's where MOUZ MD is. And I'm a huge fan of his game. I think he's got so much more than his results really show. He's got so many more levels to his game than he can possibly display on this limited team. So hopefully he can drag them to some results, because you watch their game sometimes, he will end with 30 frags just for them to win 16-14, and you're like, why is he here? Please, someone free him. And the one time they tried was with that 00 Nation roster, which was completely shambolic. It was assembled with zero real thought. It was just smashed together, here's some young pieces, and also cold zero, and then at the end of the day, it obviously didn't work. So hopefully there's another, I don't know, maybe there'll be a Spanish-speaking roster he could join at some point, because he isn't actually Brazilian. He just happens to, he's learned Portuguese, he plays on a Portuguese-speaking team. Hopefully there's salvation for him in the future, because man, he has worked to get this roster somewhat relevant.
Yeah, no, that is all reasonable. MOUZ probably the best player out of the region, in terms of the prospect of him being great, and kind of dealt a bad hand. I kind of back that, and it didn't feel like it took very long for TeamOne to reintegrate him. Of course, very familiar with his play style and such. So yeah, I'm not going to contest that one too much. I'm just going to kind of move into my picks, because first off, you stole the best underdog teams we have. I looked at it afterwards and I was like, how have you managed to finesse this? Because I was pigeonholed. I picked, I think, my underdogs in America's late, and then I looked at what I was left with, and I did have to try and find something to talk about. And my first pick is kind of in line with that one that you may not have expected. Bestia, which I would have almost made Bestia, because I just think it sounds better. But Bestia are a sort of a culmination of, I think, Argentinian. Argentinian from a team from, I think it was Isurus and Leviathan. They've kind of pulled pieces from different rosters, and they've made this calamity. And honestly, they look pretty solid. They've even got Lucan in there, which people might remember from, I think it was Antwerp, where 9Z made it out from their RMR respectively.
Yes, it was.
He was a part of that run, and then they kicked him shortly afterwards. I don't know what happened there.
Because the roles made no sense. Just to throw that out there, the roles made no sense. They had to get rid of someone.
He hadn't AWP'd, or he hadn't played a game of Counter-Strike for a whole year before joining that roster, but then suddenly had a pop-off when it came to these qualifying games for the major. So cool story for him, to make a comeback. It was strange. But yeah, I've always kind of rated, I think, Deco and Myron relatively highly in terms of, the South American circuit. I won't pretend like I've paid too much attention in sort of the more recent months, but their names that kind of stood out, and I remember them having a pretty solid, or at least having a pretty solid foundation of gameplay. So maybe not the biggest upset team that you'll really get, to be quite honest, but I think they're enough that they won't go without getting a win at the very least. They're a solid 2 and 3 team for me.
Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's fair enough. I don't really, outside of when Mayan showed up on what was it, MIBR, only to get all the dogshit rolls and immediately kicked. That's the entirety of my exposure to this team. Like, yeah, sure, Lucan's brief stint with ENCE, but there's not much like that I have to say about this roster. I don't watch America's Counter-Strike. Like, it's at the wrong side of the clock. Like, Asia CS is very earlier. That's when I wake up. I watch that. At like 1 a.m., I'm not staying up and ruining my sleep schedule to watch this roster play. Like, so I don't really know much about them. I know that they've made it here, and that's great for them. I hope they have a good time. Enjoy Mexico. Food's great. Next.
Not even concerned about you get results now, or just experience the thing you're gonna go experience.
Live. It's gonna be great.
Live life. That is crazy.
Yeah, young men on the town, Mexico City, like, go have some fun.
But what I will say is that when it comes to these South American teams, when they have to go to an event where the level is suddenly improved, I do notice that the biggest difference is usually an AWPer. Like, you look at, I think I just pulled up Lucan's stats for his sort of recent performances, farming on that AWP, by the way. I'm pretty sure he's AWPing still.
I have no idea.
I'm just gonna have to double verify. He's not even AWPing. I'm just talking out my ass. Never mind. He's farming on this team, but listen, I just don't expect Lucan to have that same performance. Apologies for me being an idiot. Hey, that's how little I've been able to catch recently of South American Counter-Strike, because very much in the same boat. Like, I've caught a lot of Asian Counter-Strike, and I used to catch a lot of South American Counter-Strike. I was kind of bouncing between those two regions, which is terrible for the sleep schedule, by the way. And kind of just landed on Asia as I guess a specialized region. But hey, I just think they from the foundation, from what I saw before, I'm still backing them. So I want Argentina back in the action. I again didn't have a lot of places to go with my underdog picks, and so I went with what I know. I'm actually just going to carry. Can I just go into my next pick as well?
We'll let you do both your underdog picks. Yeah, screw it. Back to back. Let's go.
Yeah, I've gone with Paqueta, which are another South American team that I think is actually like owned by a footballer, but they've been able to snatch up some pretty solid pieces. I've always been rather impressed with Nython on the AWP. Please, God, brain work. Okay, he is the AWPer. Yeah, I just had to triple verify because just double checking. I didn't know too much about Venom or Venom Zero.
I do know him.
Yeah, I didn't know too much about him until quite recently, but he does look like a very. I don't know really like where he came from or how he got started, but like just from. I've watched 2 games of Paqueta, and I don't think I've seen Venom miss in those games like any egregious shots, which that might be a low bar to set, but in terms of just like new talent, that is always something that is very important, making just in terms of consistency for the squad. So between those two, and I think Destiny, who's always been pretty stable, this is I actually think a more solid upset team than Bestia, if I had to make the argument, really.
I would agree. Just because I know more about these individuals, it's not much to go off. Like, Venom Zero is a player who made my, like, I have a document where for my prospects, for my the young up and coming players that I follow, I just copy paste their HLT profiles on this, so I remember who the hell they are. Like, when I just randomly stumble upon one game where they're amazing. And yeah, Venom Zero made the list. I watched a couple of his games. He was on Young Gods, who were like the Godsend Academy and Godsend were Brazilian.
Academy,
and I'm not sure if they were in like a season of WePlay or they were trying to go to WePlay or something like that. I think it was something to do with WePlay somehow.
I think they were in a season, but they had to pull out.
Yeah, something weird like that. And I remember watching them and thinking, this Venom Zero guy, this team is playing some terrible, terrible Counter-Strike that makes very little sense, because, let's be honest, a lot of Academy teams initially do, and the Brazilian ones play brave, nonsensical Counter-Strike, so they are an eyesore sometimes. But I was like, this Venom Zero guy got some nice, like, got some skill. He played pretty well on the rifles. I was like, okay. Yeah, they did play in a season of We Play, and he fragged out. All right, cool. Just check the records in the background.
I remember them defaulting some games, so I don't remember if they just forfeited the whole season.
I think it ended in forfeits at the end. Like, it wasn't the entire thing.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I know more about this team. I think they've got a better chance of upsetting. Again, I don't think they have a great chance of upsetting, because let's be real, the team and the underdogs who do have a good chance of upsetting are the mighty Fluxo, who are my second underdog pick. I got them as my second underdog pick. Like, I didn't even pick them first. I picked TeamOne and then still got Fluxo. I was so happy with that outcome.
I can't remember where my priorities were, I'll be honest. Like, I did not think very strategically coming into this pick phase.
So yeah, I was very happy with this. I mean, just look at the names on this team. Phelps, Lukowski, VSM, and then Woody is like a sort of caller AWPer. I'm not mistaken, he's still AWPing, or have they given that over to History? No, it's History AWPing now. But no, this roster, yeah, scary as hell. They're an upset potential in North America, let alone just like all these South American events. In Europe, they showed a decent level. I think the one time they came over for a Blast event. Yeah, this team, definitely worth watching. Lots of talent. I think everyone remembers Flashpoint, one of the best things was VSM from the seasons they had. Like, VSM on that. It was MIBR, right? It was that weird MIBR in between team where they had him and some others.
No.
And KNG.
What were they called? It wasn't MIBR. O Plano.
No Plano. That's who it was.
Yes,
No Plano.
it was O Plano.
No Plano. That was amazing. Because they had no Plano. They were just here to frag, and it was amazing. I loved that roster just because of the vibes. Not because I thought it was a good roster, but the vibes were great. VSM is actually really skilled. Like, to be fair, to me, he's not just a highlight reel with the shades and the chain. Like, he's not just a meme. He actually is like a solid player. But yeah, this roster got plenty of upside. Zeus coaching, I think they're one to really watch out for, to just make it actually straight out. I think of all the underdogs we've chosen, this is the one to put actual money on to upset and go through. Like, they are genuinely that good. So yeah, Flux, a huge coup to get this late in the picking.
Yeah, I don't know what I was doing. I totally agree with Fluxo. I actually thought I think it was Rotterdam that they were in last year. ESL Challenger Rotterdam. I thought that might have been an event where they even, take some solid upset wins in that side of the bracket. I think the only team they ended up beating was TeamOne, which is more of a domestic matchup rather than going international, which is kind of the point. But yeah, I mean, they go. I mean, I think it was like ENCE Outsiders were the final. I think there was MOUZ in there too. Eternal Fire, I think, also made it through. Some pretty stiff competition in all fairness, but that's why I actually wanted Fluxo to somehow succeed out of that bracket, because I think
they only lost to Outsiders at that event. I just looked it up.
Yeah, and I think it was it was overtime loss. I remember, and I think it was Dust 2, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, they lost in the BO1's Dust 2 overtime double OT as well.
Yeah, man.
Crazy.
It felt like that could have been, I don't know, it could have been a moment for them. So
definitely would have been huge.
Yeah, I was pretty sold on them. I was they missed out on Rio. I think they were like just shy of qualifying for Rio a couple of times, and then I was kind of sad for them because I thought they were ready for that, to be quite honest. But yeah, this feels like a prime opportune moment. I think for all the right reasons as well. The squad looks good. They actually have some depth, and I think I saw one tournament where they clearly didn't have a plan. I think it was for one of these Blast qualifiers that I was watching them. I was just like, what on earth are they doing? But that's because they had, I think, the Rotterdam quals the same day, and they were obviously more focused on that. Like, I think they had one life that they could give up in these Blast quals, and they didn't really try that hard. And then I think made it through the Blast quals after going through the lower bracket because they just played better, actually.
Just tried.
So, yeah, no, obviously put more focus into the remaining games. So, yeah, I mean, good squad, but maybe work out your scheduling.
Yeah, it's some advice.
But they won't have any problems with other RMR, really. So,
yeah, a lot of tier 2 teams could do with figuring out their scheduling. To be fair, event organizers could also sort themselves out. But hey, that's a conversation for another show.
A lot going on, yeah.
Yeah. So let's get on to the final, and of course, second most important region in Counter-Strike right now. That is Asia. We are, I think, fairly emotionally invested in this region. I think seeing certain teams' results recently, it's been quite the ride. Yumi, start us off. Who's your favorite in the Asia RMR?
Well, wasn't going to be my first pick, but I chose IHC. Now, they are going through roster changes at the moment and have more recently have to play with their coach standing in for, I think, the ESL Challenger League playoffs, which is obviously not ideal.
Mm-hmm.
Pardon. Sorry, that one crept up on me.
It's all right.
Yeah, IHC, they have just made a roster move with Hastika, who is a player that they are very familiar with at the very least. I think Blitz, Bartak, uh trying to think who else. I think everybody on this team aside from Annihilation has played with Hastika before.
Okay.
At some point or another, because he used to play with the old Checkmate before they transitioned or they got bought by IHC. So a
Right.
player that they're familiar with, and even with that in mind, I still didn't understand why they went with Hastika. I didn't get it. That said, I've seen games recently because I think he was playing with Clutch Gaming, very much an instigator, like aggressive moves CT side, aggressive moves T side, which is very much what you would want to see out of players like Score, the player removed. It made more sense. It clicked more together that he could fulfill those roles for IHC in much the same way, and the adoption period shouldn't be that difficult either, given their familiarity. So while it's not the same team as the IHC of Katowice and ESL Pro League where they're getting these upset wins, I do have faith that they can integrate him quick enough that they should still be able to make it out.
Okay. I just don't like it. Like, I get it makes sense in a lot of ways to sign this guy, but I watched a couple of games. It's just not very good. He's just nowhere near as good as
It's
what
not
they
the
had before.
same. Yeah,
Like,
I know.
it's not even close. He's like a middle of the pack Mongolian player, which it's great they have such a deep scene that I can say that with confidence. That I kind of like, I've seen him play. I've seen a bunch of other like Mongolian teams play. He's kind of fine for the Mongolian scene as a role player. He's not Score. Like, Score dumpsters the Mongolian scene. Like, he's a far higher level player, and for me that's a big deal. Like, they probably still make it through. Like, the Asia RMR, when you look beyond the first four, I'm not even scared of Vertex really. Like, the other OCE team, there's not much going on down there, so they should be able to make it through. They're just, to me, they don't look convincing. Like, they're not going to be convincingly going through. That's why I personally wouldn't have chosen them, and of course didn't, because I went with Rare Atom, who, even though they got bounced by Big in Europe, it looked good until Map 3 arrived, and then they just got absolutely exploded. Like, it was unreal. I think they're currently the best team in Asia. IHC, it was really a bit of a toss-up for a lot of people between them and IHC before IHC got worse. And now I think it's pretty established. Like, they're just the best team in Asia. They have 4 different players who can win you a map. They have some really exciting young talent, a style that just suits them, but also can throw you off a little bit. I think, yeah, Rare Atom, comfortable favourites in this one. And if they don't make it out, it would be seen as like a great problem for them. Like, if they don't make it through this RMR, don't expect this roster to stay the same, because that'd be the sort of momentous sort of defeat and disappointment that would just instigate immediate change. Like, you would never recover.
The cool thing for them is that they, I think, have the 2 best riflers in the scene at the moment. Mercury, I think, is the best rifler they have in Asian Counter-Strike, only kind of replacing Jam Young, who I think has an incredible ceiling, but has actually been, in some respects, struggling with consistency in the same way that we used to expect from him on like old Vici.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this team. I would have picked them if you hadn't first. Um, they were even before IHC, and with all the success that they've had at majors, particularly, that's why everyone thinks about IHC as being the top Asian team. I think Rare Atom have always been better. Like in the head to head, sometimes I mean, I think more often than not, Rare Atom have actually beat them, but when it's come to like the major quals, they kind of crumble versus IHC. And I don't know
Right.
what happened specifically, but yeah, no, really solid team. Mercury, Mosea, both the new additions, cool guys,
Mm.
frag hard, and that's all. That's all they really wanted to add to this roster. Like they don't need more thinkers. I feel like Kaze is a thinking kind of player in mid rounds alongside Advent, and I feel like they're the real leadership figures of the team. The rest of the three can just do what they want and frag.
Yeah, and it's served them very well.
Yeah.
Outside of, as you said, major qualifiers where they've not shown up as well as much, they've been pretty outstanding. So Rare Atom, dangerous, going to be fun to watch. I always think teams with young players are always fun to watch because there's just so much unknown. Like it's great to see like new like facets of a player's game reveal themselves. Let's see what they show us at this event. Underdogs.
I was going to just say the noticeable absence that we've gone with here is no Australian teams in either of our favorites, which is
take the elbows.
First off, Grayhound probably. I mean, they should go through to a certain degree. I just don't know which team gets replaced from it. I don't think we've had a Asia Pacific RMR or like qualifying bracket where both teams have been present, where an Australian team hasn't or an Oceanic team hasn't made it out and into the main major circuit. So the history is there, but it does feel like this is the right time for there not to funnily enough be an Oceanic team. I just don't. I'm not confident in the way that Grayhound play.
No,
at
I
the
don't.
Moment.
I'm not a big fan of Grayhound, and yeah, pretty much you've nailed it. All those points, exactly what it is. I'm just not a fan of the way they approach the game. Sure, they have some individual players who are good, and they've got some players like Vexite who should be getting better and growing into being one of the stars of this like roster. Not seen enough of it, so I'm not really that sold. I think they get banged out by whoever they end up facing out of those ones in the upper final and in the lower final.
There's not even like an Australian style that I can really like latch onto and think like, oh, this'll work. Like, you know, region to region, head to head. There's not a stylistic thing where I can just look at that and say it can work. So
yeah, and the number of conversations I have with people who are intimate in their knowledge of the Australian scene, it sounds like I'm listening to someone talk about like 2016 NA. Like no one's pugging properly. Like no one gives a shit. Like it's all half-assed. Like oh okay, I'm immediately sold on just ignoring this entire region.
Dude, I don't doubt that their practice must suck. Like NA complains about it enough. Like Australia, that must be rough. They don't even get the same like Mongolia's in a great place to be able to still practice EU. Like it's like probably 90, maybe 100 plus ping at a stretch, but you know, low 100s, and you can still get good practice out of that. Like Australia, there's no shot. Like you're so far away, and routing is terrible between America and Australia. You can practice against the Asian teams, but that's again only going to get you so far, I think. So
ain't no way Mongolians are pracking against Europe.
That's what I see themselves have been saying, that they scrim against EU teams.
How on earth? They must be in Europe. Geographically, that blows my mind. Like, they could like, if Kazakhstani teams are playing on 100 ping, how are they playing on? Something's not.
For like, maybe I'm undershooting, but it's maybe like 150, something like that. It's if
they can make it through that, then you have no excuse if you're an Aussie. Like you're just pracking against each other, they don't take it seriously. Like that's my point. They just don't take it seriously. Like practice is practice. Like I always hate the excuse of how are we supposed to get good if we can't play against the best? What did the best just magically come out of an egg as the best? Like no, they practiced against each other and became better. Just shut up and get on with it. It's always been my attitude towards teams who say that sort of thing. It's just get better. The resources are there. They're people for you to play against. Stop making excuses and take your prac seriously. It should be that simple. It should really be that simple. So I'm not a fan of it.
Fair enough. Confirmed Oceania hater.
If what's been reported is true, we're basing it on an assumption of like someone, whispering in my ear, hey, by the way, like everyone in Australia isn't taking their prac seriously. Like,
Yeah, it's rough out here.
It's an assumption, but if that's true, Fuck them. Like, I don't care. Fuck them. Should have tried. Underdogs, right?
You want to go first, or
I'll go first just so we can get out of the way because I really want to talk about your team more. So I've chosen Tyloo because the team I wanted to pick got taken, and it's not like Tyloo's a bad choice to have here. Like, honestly, I have them as better than Vertex, who are HLTV ranked higher. Consider them a far stronger team than them. It's just they've not really had that many opportunities to show it. I think, like the events they've played in, they keep facing Rare Atom and LinVision, who LinVision somehow not making it here. That's a problem, I think, for China. I think they'd have rather seen them make it through. But yeah, Tyloo, they've got some really good players. Like, most of them not in their primes. Like, they've not playing the best version of themselves that we've ever seen. Some of them are getting on a bit. Like, you know, Attacker and Summer, they've been here a while. Like, they're not going to be the same players they were 4 years ago when they first started showing out with Tyloo. But overall, I still think this team's dangerous. Pose some threats. They're like China's third best team. That's just the most disappointing part about it. They're not the team I wanted to see here.
I'd even probably take Wings Up over them, maybe even so.
Ooh, that's a conversation,
yeah. Yeah, no, they're in a weird place. I mean, they wanted to bring in structure. They brought in Bentet, and I actually think they rejected structure, which is part of my problem with Tyloo historically. Is that I think they mischaracterized the Asia region by making it through to majors and big events previously, and only playing like hyper aggressive, super flicky, sometimes ill prepared for fights, but the mechanics were there. They play high sense or whatever. That's not the Asia scene. Like, it is more developed than that. Unfortunately, Tyloo actually have enough talent that they can sometimes outclass those teams. They fell behind a long time ago to Rare Atom, to LinVision to a certain degree. Lin, I think, solidified back on that path. And it just felt like they didn't try and evolve ever, which is the bit of disappointing part here, because if there is going to be anyone that succeeds on this roster, like, it has to be DanKing. And I can't even make feasible arguments for anybody else to have like big pop-offs for this team. Attacker can maybe do some work. That much is true, but it's so hard for the rest of them to pull their weight when I just feel like there is no foundation. Like, they're constantly dancing on just pavement, and eventually that pavement cracks, and they just don't care. They keep on stepping. They're breaking mothers' backs. So I'm sad about Tyloo, to be quite honest. I thought they just needed good leadership, but I worry that there's like politics, or some of these players have been with the organization for so long that they just overrule in-game leaders that they don't get on with or something. So
yeah, that would be a real problem if that was the case. That'd be an issue, but we'll see how they do. We'll see how they play, because it's not been long since Bentet was removed, is it? It's fairly recent change.
I think they moved Freeman in ahead of him.
Yeah,
which is someone that they used to play with once upon a time, like old Tyloo, right? So
it'll be interesting to see what version shows up. But more importantly, let's get onto your underdog pick. Who have you taken?
The team you were more excited for, Eruption. Previously a Raft in the region. They have shifted roles, and they've employed Dobu, who used to be a part of NKT, as like a star player, now turned in-game leader for this team, which is kind of strange to me, but he's probably not the most exciting player on this roster. I know for a fact, first off, Fury, as much as his stats may be poor, as I pull them up now, he is actually a pretty high impact player in especially like close games that they find themselves in. Coolest as an AWPer, very stable set of hands. I think NKT themselves used them at the last Mesa event for a Blast qual, and he was very impressive. NKT ended up winning that. And Yami, who, listen, very young guy in the region, alongside players like Senzu that have ended up on weird rosters. I think Yami's found himself in good company here on this team, because they've got some older heads in there. They've got some newer blood. and they're kind of mishmashing everything together instead of just the constant Mongolia media circus of constant roster moves that used to be a part of the issue for this region.
Yeah, you've touched on the 3 players I really like. I'm locked in on. Dobu, IGL / like still he's mechanically a really good player and still puts up good fragging numbers, like a headshot percentage. I think he's almost touching 60. Like he's got a ridiculously high skill level. Really great player. Coolast, the best way to phrase it is steady, stable. Like he's pretty, I think, kind of like an antithesis of Annihilation. Like he's not going to be as high in the peaks, but he's not also going to completely throw games doing crazy stuff. So he's a pretty like nice player to have in here. And Yami's really the one I've been tracking him for a while. Because I was like, when a 16-year-old drops 30, I kind of notice. Like that's kind of how I start my scouting. So ever since then, every game I can, I'm like, all right, let's follow this game and see what Yami does. And he's gotten slowly better. Like because he was playing on D13 with Annihilation.
Yes.
With a couple others who elude me right now because we've moved on in the world. There's too many changes. Things happen. It was like 6 months ago. But he was really supportive, not really like getting a lot of favorable like positions on that team. In this roster, it feels like he's really being nurtured for the star roles, and he puts up great performances. Really excited to see how he does against this level of competition because sure, he does get to face teams like IHC fairly often, but maybe he doesn't see these Australian sides. He might get pub stomp the Middle Eastern qualifier teams just to get himself revved up. That'll be fun to watch. I'm really excited to watch Yami play at this kind of on this kind of stage. This is his introduction to like proper Counter-Strike, like big events. Like I'm super gassed for this kid.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm right there with you. Similar sort of radar tracking, especially when I get to watch these Asia games. I'm like, oh wait, he's how young? Oh my god, he looks like eye test wise pretty impressive. Just gets caught out by doing silly things or making mistakes, and that's just simply natural at that kind of a skill rating. So yeah, I did just realize when you brought up D13, I did also I think, oh god. I want to say, I previously touched on Hastika.
Yeah.
I can't remember if he played on that team with Annihilation.
I don't think
you
he
said
did.
Because you said D13, and I was like, I swear Hastika was on D13. I think they might have been in different periods.
Oh, he was. He was on there with.
I think he.
Oh no, he was there with 2 Latvians. So.
Yeah, he joined at a different time. Never mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, Yami, solid player. So, kind of interested to see how he does when he's staring down the barrel of an IHC that have kind of put Mongolia on the map. Making it 2 back-to-back majors and not going down without a fight. It's sometimes people look at the Asia region and just go, oh well, they're the 0-3 team, aren't they?
Never.
Nope, never. Not
never
IHC.
I'll pick Australia teams for 0-3. I'll never pick like IHC or any of those guys for 0-3. They never are. In the O2 game, they'll face a Brazilian or Australian team and pip them because I always think they should be better, and they typically prove me right. Like I've never lost that point.
Yeah, they end up being better, exactly. So yeah, I think that might get to the heads of some of these Eruption guys, but I'm excited because they're in a weird place at the moment where I think their recent results are pretty poor, like shooting below where they were kind of on an upward trend, I think, domestically, and then they suddenly had some pretty poor results. I think they lost to, it was New Happy in the playoffs of ECL.
Yeah, they fell out of ECL, but I didn't follow who exactly they lost to.
Yeah, they lost to New Happy, which is like a kind of mishmash. Albeit they're a core team from the Asia region that I've been plugging away at like open for a decent amount of time.
I have no idea who they are.
Exactly. I had to remember I had to do some research to look at these guys before, and even with that, I feel like I don't understand who these players are. But yeah, I think Eruption are probably the one underdog that I'm really betting on because God, what a scene it would be if we have 2 Mongolian teams or just 2, I guess, pan Asia or just Asian teams make it out into the main stages of the major. I mean, this is the first time that we can even have that. It's not the first time we can have that happen. The other RMR is technically true, but
this looks very doable, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. Like we've just got a deeper pool of teams.
Because I'm running through the bracket in my head, like, yeah, IHC and Rear Atom probably have to face each other in the upper semi. All right, great. One of them goes down. Just based on what we've talked about, let's say it's IHC. And then Eruption in the other upper semi face Grayhound, probably. You know, assuming they take care of Tyloo. I mean, the upset happens there, then brilliant. Brilliant, love to see it. But more than likely, Grayhound goes to the upper final, lose it. Just saying. I think they lose it. That's when things get spicy. To go through that lower bracket run, and you might end up with Eruption, probably more likely IHC in that lower final against Grayhound. Yeah, that's going to be some spicy times. So I'm really excited to follow this Asia RMR as much as I can, considering I also have 2 European RMRs, an American RMR, and
there's a lot going on.
But you know,
I have to say, the one underdog that we didn't pick that I am scared about still is probably the most unknown quantity, but Twisted Minds with Loba and Doc. I am actually kind of scared that there's just going to be so little information on how these teams operate because they're just like mixes effectively assembled for the qualifiers, and then they've somehow just been able to make it work. Loba's actually like got some pretty solid mid-round calling from my understanding for this team. So
just ban Mirage and you beat them. Like, why are we talking about them?
Yeah,
just ban
Mirage. No, I just think I think they're going to be kind of an interesting story for me.
I think they're going to get absolutely crushed. They're going to be lucky if they don't get 16-0 in every map. They're awful. I watched the qualifier they made it through. That was horrendous. Like, the only thing I've seen that was worse was I watched someone found a clip of like a regional league from like West Africa, and it was firstly streamed at 3 FPS. But then also it was Gold Nova level gameplay. Like, that's the only time I've watched worse Counter-Strike labelled professional than these Middle East qualifiers they have every year that are just so weak. Like, it's horrifyingly weak. I don't get why we have them. It's like having an India qualifier for the Asia RMR. It doesn't make sense.
We used to have India invites for older majors, didn't we? So
it was silly. So I genuinely think they will get smashed. Invictus International have a far better chance of doing something.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I just, they're the one team in this bracket that I feel like I don't know, I can't place properly. They're the only one that I have my reservation on. They could be an actual surprise coming into this bracket. But your point is right. I don't disagree with you on that front. Like this. It will be a hard bracket. I'm sure they're just probably going to be happy for the experience because they probably didn't expect to even go as far as they did in the, the qualifiers. So
yeah, they'll enjoy Ulaanbaatar.
Yeah,
I envy them. I genuinely want to visit that part of the world. I know for a lot of people it seems like a bit like of a weird one. Like, it doesn't come up on your like resort packages when you're looking at all-inclusive holidays, like Ulaanbaatar. And I'm like, yo, that sounds dope. Take me out on the steppe, like, show me around. Like, that'd be so cool.
Apparently, they're really pushing for tourism this year. I was linked some article by my brother. Yeah, he was like, "Oh yeah, they're relaxing visas and they're making it simpler to travel because I think they just made a new airport, so there's like more services that go over. So
okay, yeah, I mean,
it will work out because their main transit lane just can't be taken. Flying over Ukraine, Russia, kind of just not a thing. So,
wait, are you going around the other way?
Yeah. So I think for my flights, I'm going through Turkey.
It's just go like down and around.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah,
I don't know, but I think it's a super exciting place to go visit. But hey, that's just me. I think it's an awesome language as well. Just on a side note, Mongolian. So fun to listen to. Like,
oh my god, I've tried listening. I'm trying to like learn phrases or like also Ulaanbaatar. First off, all the English pronunciations I've seen out there suck. They say Ulaanbaatar, and I think it's Ulaanbaatar. Like
Yeah.
they say it like very rapidly, like also like an underlying. I'm not even sure which one's right. I'm just hoping to be corrected when I'm there. So
Yeah,
somebody tell me, please.
like I've listened to a lot of what's it, the Meta channel that does like Mongolian language live streams for it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like some of the more obscure games that aren't covered, sometimes I just feel like watching, so I'll have it on and I'm listening to the guy talk. I'm like, this is fascinating, just by itself, almost distracting me from the game. Listening to his soft, like he's got like an ASMR voice. The guy does their casting, like really soft spoken, just into the mic, and I'm like, I've never heard a language like this. I want to learn this. Like, someone teach me.
It's a really weirdly smooth. It's a weirdly smooth language to listen to.
Yeah, okay, enough fawning over Mongolia. We are coming up on 2 hours. That is the longest episode we've ever done by a long shot. I'd hate to be the idiot who edits this, to add all the little graphics he has planned. So yeah, thanks for joining me again, Yumi. It's a bit of a long slog. Hopefully these events go well. Hopefully you enjoy your time in Mongolia. And we see a great major. So yeah, thank you all for watching. More content coming soon. Yeah, we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Goodbye.